For over a decade, it seemed like a fundamental law of the universe. Marvel makes a movie, the world shows up. They built an empire not just on spectacle, but on a contract with the audience. A promise that each piece, no matter how standalone, was building towards something greater. And for a while it worked. We got invested. We showed up for the heroes, for the post-credit scenes, for the shared experience of it all. But after the summit that was Avengers Endgame, something broke. The once unbreakable cultural force began to look, well, mortal. The project started to feel less like essential chapters and more like content for content's sake. This is about a pattern of failure, a series of projects that one by one chipped away at the foundation of the most dominant franchise in modern history. This is the story of how the unstoppable juggernaut was finally, and perhaps inevitably, stopped. So, let's start with where the warning signs first became impossible to ignore: Eternals. This was supposed to be the bold new direction for the MCU, an epic, Oscar-winning director bringing her unique vision to a cosmic-level story. But instead, it became the first real crack in the foundation. Financially, Eternals was a clear underperformer. It had a massive budget, reportedly around $200 million, not even including the enormous marketing campaign they put behind it. And for that investment, it pulled in just over $400 million worldwide. Now, on paper that sounds like a lot of money, but by the blockbuster rule of thumb, where a film needs to make about 2.5 times its budget to truly turn a profit, this thing barely broke even, if it even did that. For Marvel, a studio that had spent a decade printing money, this was a huge red flag. It proved that the Marvel brand alone couldn't guarantee a hit, especially for a brand new, untested property with no familiar faces. This was the first MCU film to ever be branded rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics slammed it, and a big part of that criticism was aimed squarely at its pacing and structure. This is a long movie, right? But it feels even longer because it's trying to do way too much. It's trying to introduce 10 completely new characters, give them each a meaningful arc, explain their entire millennia-spanning backstory, and set up a new cosmic mythology for the franchise, all in one go. The result is a film that feels completely disjointed. It has this really awkward rhythm where it lurches from slow, ponderous scenes of characters staring dramatically at landscapes to these messy, CGI-heavy action sequences that have zero emotional weight because we barely know these people. We're told these characters have deep bonds spanning centuries, but we never actually feel it because the movie is too busy rushing to the next plot point. It's a classic case of franchise building getting in the way of basic storytelling. So, Eternals is crucial to this story because it represents Marvel's first major post-Endgame miscalculation. It demonstrated that audiences wouldn't just show up for anything with a Marvel logo. The execution had to be there. And when you combine its financial underperformance with its creative stumbles, you have the first real sign that the machine was breaking down. If Eternals was a quiet crack in the foundation, then Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was the moment the entire structure shook, proving that a movie could be a financial powerhouse and a creative disappointment at the same time. Let's start with the numbers because on paper, this film was an absolute monster. It opened to a staggering $187 million domestically and went on to rake in $955 million worldwide. It wasn't just a hit, it was the fourth highest grossing film of 2022. But here's where the story gets complicated. The film's reception was, to put it mildly, all over the place. It holds the dubious honor of being one of the most expensive films ever made with a net budget of $350 million, and while it turned a profit, the conversation quickly shifted from its earnings to its execution. The film was plagued by reports of extensive reshoots and studio interference to the point where it was joked that even star Benedict Cumberbatch wasn't sure if he was in the final movie. This behind-the-scenes chaos translated directly to the screen. The plot was described as a clutter that was difficult to follow, with scenes so saturated with plot holes and inconsistencies that they created a sense of vague nausea. The criticism crystallized around two major points. First, the character assassination of Wanda Maximoff. After her grief-stricken journey in WandaVision, her sudden descent into a villain felt like a brutal betrayal of her development. Her motivation to find her fake children in another universe felt rushed and turned her into a self-centered narcissist. Second, the much-hyped multiverse and its cameos were criticized as underwhelming fan service. The introduction of characters like Mr. Fantastic and Professor X was thrilling for about 2 minutes before they were all unceremoniously slaughtered, rendering their appearance ultimately meaningless and lackluster. Multiverse of Madness represents a critical paradox. It's a film that made $1 billion but left a significant portion of its audience cold. It demonstrated that Marvel's commercial power could, for a time, insulate it from creative failure. It proved that the audience's appetite for the MCU could override critical pans, but it also planted a seed of doubt. If a movie this messy could still make money, what incentive did Marvel have to course correct? It was a short-term win that may have contributed to the long-term fatigue we're seeing now. If Multiverse of Madness showed that Marvel could weather bad buzz, Love and Thunder proved that success could be a double-edged sword. On the surface, this movie was a certified hit. It grossed a massive $760 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film in the Thor franchise and part of a very exclusive club. It's one of the few film series where each installment made more money than the last. But that financial victory came with a hidden cost. The central criticism was its jarring tonal inconsistency. Director Taika Waititi, who revitalized the character with the comedic and heartfelt Ragnarok, seemed to push his style into self-parody here. The film couldn't decide what it wanted to be. It awkwardly juggled 3 incredibly weighty storylines: a tragic cancer narrative for Jane Foster, a vengeful god-butchering villain named Gore, and the comedic fallout of Thor's midlife crisis. The result was a movie that undercut its own most powerful moments with a poorly timed joke. 1 minute you're watching the terrifying Gore, a devastated father mourning his daughter. The next you're whisked away to a joke about Thor's jealous weapons or a screaming goat. This whiplash was especially damaging to Natalie Portman's return as Mighty Thor. The film often reduced her arc to a punchline, focusing more on "Portman has muscles and is Thor too" than on the emotional weight of her journey. The comedy didn't serve the story, it actively worked against it, making the film feel, as one critic put it, like a party that no one wants to be at. This tonal failure is what makes its financial success so puzzling. It's a film that boasts an incredible 5 Oscar-winning actors, and yet their immense talents are wasted in a script that can't commit to a tone. Love and Thunder represents the moment the MCU's signature humor became a critical liability. It demonstrated that audiences would still show up for a known quantity, but it severely damaged goodwill. It proved that even a film making more money than its predecessors could still be seen as a creative failure, leaving the franchise's future feeling less certain than its box office receipts would suggest. Then came She-Hulk, and with it, one of the most stark divides between what Marvel thought its audience wanted and what the audience actually responded to. This wasn't just a show that people disagreed on. It was a case study in creative identity crisis and the tangible consequences of pushing a production pipeline to its breaking point. Let's start with the most immediate and visceral reaction: the CGI. From the moment the first trailer dropped, the visual effects became a massive point of contention. The rendering of She-Hulk herself was widely criticized online for looking off. And this criticism opened a much larger conversation about the working conditions at Marvel's VFX houses. Artists began speaking out, revealing that they were consistently overworked and faced with endless last-minute changes from the studio. It wasn't just that the CGI was bad, it was a symptom of a system that was beginning to crumble under the weight of its own relentless output. But the show also faced a more philosophical criticism about She-Hulk's very design. Director Kat Coiro responded to those who wanted a more muscular heroine by saying the critique stemmed from our culture's belief in its ownership of women's bodies, noting they based the character on Olympian athletes, not bodybuilders. And while there's merit to that point, it also felt like it sidestepped a core issue. In a universe where the Hulk is a giant, impossibly muscular behemoth, his cousin's more proportional design to some viewers felt less like a stylistic choice and more like a reluctance to truly make a female character as powerful and physically imposing as her male counterpart. However, the problems ran deeper than just the visuals. There was a profound audience disconnect with the format and tone. This was pitched as a fun lawyer show, but in execution, it seemed unsure of what it wanted to be. It was a sitcom that kept getting interrupted by mandatory MCU connections. The audience score cratered to as low as 32%. This wasn't just review bombing. It was a clear indicator that the show's specific blend of humor failed to land with a significant portion of the core Marvel audience. It was too much of a sitcom for superhero fans and too bogged down in superhero lore for sitcom fans. Ultimately, She-Hulk is a fascinating failure. It was an expensive experiment costing a reported $25 million per episode, which resulted in one of the lowest audience-rated MCU projects and no plans for a second season. It highlighted the structural issues plaguing Marvel's VFX industry and demonstrated a growing fatigue with the cameo of the week model that had sustained the Disney Plus era. It was a show that talked directly to the audience, only to discover that the audience wasn't always listening. If Thor and Doctor Strange 2 showed that Marvel could still make money on creatively shaky ground, Quantumania was the moment the bottom truly fell out. This wasn't just an underperformance. It was a full-blown financial and creative crisis that signaled the audience's patience had finally run out. Let's start with the numbers because they are staggering. This was not a cheap film. The gross production budget was a whopping $388 million, one of the most expensive films ever made. Now, the general rule of thumb is that a film needs to make about 2.5 times its net budget just to break even at the box office. That meant Quantumania needed to clear roughly $825 million. It didn't even come close. It grossed only $476.1 million worldwide. By any standard metric, this was a major financial disappointment and one of the few MCU films to not break even in its theatrical run. This showed that the Marvel brand was no longer a guarantee of profit. And the reason for that becomes painfully clear when you look at the reception. The film was critically panned, sitting at a rotten 47% on Rotten Tomatoes. The criticism was universal. It trapped its relatable everyman hero Scott Lang in a garish, entirely green screen world in a story that felt less like an Ant-Man adventure and more like a rejected Fantastic Four script. One IMDb reviewer perfectly captured the sentiment, calling it a Looney Tunes story with more CGI than there was any type of interesting story. This leads to the second colossal failure, the handling of Kong the Conqueror. This film had one job: to establish Kong as a terrifying, multidimensional threat on par with Thanos. Instead, it made him look like a chump. Jonathan Majors' performance was widely praised as intense and compelling, but the script completely undermined him. Here was the MCU's new big bad, supposedly capable of destroying timelines, being defeated by ants. Giant, intelligent ants, but still, thins. The villain, who was meant to be the gravitational center of the entire multiverse saga, was beaten in his first real outing by the franchise's smallest Avenger. This created a massive villain problem for the MCU that Thanos never had. Thanos was built up slowly and then he won in his first full appearance. Kong lost, and his defeat felt unearned and anticlimactic, draining all the imminent dread from the character. The fallout was immense. Internally, Marvel was reportedly shaken and shocked by the negative reception. According to reports, they genuinely thought they had a banger on their hands. The reaction forced them to a horrifying realization, as one insider put it: "Oh no, our internal barometer is not attuned to what people want anymore." This was a studio that had lost its way, completely misjudging its own product and its audience's appetite. Quantumania was more than a bad movie. It was a systemic failure. It was a film that cost a fortune to make a world nobody liked, wasted its iconic new villain, and proved that audiences would reject even a surefire franchise bet if the quality wasn't there. It was the clearest sign yet that the Marvel machine was broken. And then we arrive at the film that became the symbol of the entire era, the Marvels. This wasn't just another underperformer. This was a historic, catastrophic event that served as the final undeniable proof that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in a full-blown crisis. It's the case study for what happens when every single one of the problems we've discussed converges into one perfect storm. Let's start with the number that says it all: $206 million. That's the total global box office haul for a film that cost a staggering $374 million to produce before marketing. To put that financial insanity into perspective, that's 4 times the budget of the sci-fi epic The Creator, which was nominated for an Oscar for its visual effects. The Marvels needed to make roughly $768 million worldwide to break even. It didn't even come close to a third of that. It is without any doubt the lowest-grossing film in the entire history of the MCU, a title it took from The Incredible Hulk. This wasn't a bomb, it was a nuclear detonation at the box office. But the financials only tell half the story. The other half is the reception. Some critics eviscerated it, calling it abject misery and a new low for Marvel. The film couldn't decide if it was a zany cosmic comedy or a serious sequel to Captain Marvel, and it satisfied fans of neither tone. The audience seemed to make up its mind by simply not showing up. It opened to a paltry $46 million domestic opening weekend, one of the lowest in MCU history. The reasons for this are a laundry list of everything that had gone wrong with Marvel's strategy. First, there was the homework problem. This wasn't just a sequel to a billion-dollar movie. It was a sequel that required viewers to have seen not just Captain Marvel, but the WandaVision and Ms. Marvel Disney Plus series to understand who Monica Rambeau and Kamala Khan were. For a casual audience already suffering from oversaturation, this was an insurmountable barrier to entry. Second, the film became a lightning rod for the toxic culture war discourse that had been simmering around Marvel since Captain Marvel. It was relentlessly targeted online as woke propaganda, a female-led project that became a symbol for everything the fanbase hated about the studio's direction. But to pin its failure solely on the fans is to ignore the broader issue: franchise fatigue. The Marvels was the fourth Marvel film released in 2023 following Quantumania and Guardians of the Galaxy, and it was released amidst a constant churn of Disney Plus content. The product was no longer special, it felt like content on a conveyor belt. As one report noted, the problem wasn't necessarily fatigue, but the audiences could no longer trust that every Marvel project was an essential, quality event. Internally, the reaction was one of shock. The Marvels is the proof that you cannot simply demand audience investment. You have to earn it. It demonstrated that a shared universe is a strength until it becomes a cage, locking out new viewers under the weight of its own continuity. It was the moment the MCU's commercial invincibility shattered completely, forcing a long-overdue corporate and creative recalibration. It wasn't just a movie, it was the bill coming due for years of expansion at the cost of cohesion, and the price was catastrophic. Years of bloat, disconnect, and content churn created a perfect storm. The bloat made failures catastrophic. The disconnect meant the projects were often creatively misguided from the start. And the content churn eroded the very foundation of audience goodwill that the empire was built on. They mistook audience loyalty for a blank check, believing we'd show up for anything with a Marvel logo regardless of quality. This led to a fundamental breakdown in trust. The audience could no longer trust that a Marvel project would be good, and Marvel could no longer trust that the audience would just show up. So what's the future outlook? Is the MCU dead? Of course not. But the era of automatic success is over. The failure of these projects has already forced a massive creative recalibration at Marvel Studios. They've slowed down their release schedule, focusing on quality over quantity. They've brought back old favorites like the original Avengers writers and are reportedly focusing more on tighter, standalone stories. The path forward isn't a mystery. It's the path they walked for the first decade. Well-developed characters in compelling stories that respect the audience's intelligence and time. They need to earn our trust back, one good project at a time. The multiverse saga can be saved, but it requires a return to the core principles that made them great in the first place. The story of these films isn't just a story of failure. It's a cautionary tale for any entertainment empire. It's a reminder that no brand is too big to fail, that audience loyalty is a privilege, not a right. The MCU isn't over, but the age of innocence certainly is. They've been humbled. Now, we wait to see if they've been taught a lesson.